Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm here as always with John Micton. John, how are you? Coming today from Geneva as usual?
Yeah, and you're in Prague, and you guys have had the terrible floods. It's just been unbelievable.
Yeah, Prague has been okay. I mean, the river was so high. I mean, the international school my kids go to was that has flooded like in the last big flood 20 years ago, but it didn't this time. Other parts of the country, it's been really bad. And actually, Poland is getting bad. Poland's going to be worse in the next couple of days. So,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, there was some torrential flooding in the south and the east of the country and a little bit of the north, but Prague kind of escaped the worst of it. So, nothing too bad here, just a lot of rain.
And how is your wife's family? Because they live in Poland.
Yeah, they're okay. Poznan, where they are, is okay. So, fingers crossed. But yeah, it's been a bad for a lot of people here, definitely in Central Europe. How's it been? How's it been where you are?
We had floods and landslides all summer. So far, so good.
Yeah,
We have sunshine, but this summer, as we talked last time, we were on the podcast with
yeah,
EarthDay.org. Switzerland really got hit hard, and this was the first year where I really was like, "Wow, climate change is not something that's in a newspaper. It's in the environment that I live in and that my relatives live in."
yeah.
So yeah, very real. But today is kind of amazing, Dan, because this morning I woke up and I was looking at LinkedIn, and there on the top was Clara Hawkins, who is our guest, and she had just won this award. And I was like, oh my God, she won the TechWomen100 Global Achievement Award for 2024. And I was like, I can't believe she's going to come on our podcast. So I feel very humbled and very privileged to have Clara on here. And she's done a wonderful piece of resource. She's taken the EU AI Act and broken it down for K-12 schools. Clara's the head of artificial intelligence for Globeducate, and she also works for the Center for AI and Digital Policy in Washington, D.C. Her resume is phenomenal. She's also a third culture person, speaks many languages, has lived all over. So I just feel we're so lucky to have her here today. And one thing, Dan, we've talked about it a lot, is that if you think of the AI companies, and Amy Webb in her book, The Big Nine, talk about that, is that there are 9 big AI companies, 5 in the United States and 3 in China. They're
Yeah.
pretty much all run by men, and they have a very different mindset and maybe approach to things. And what's so wonderful, and we feel so privileged to have her, Clara, on the International Schools podcast, is that she has done a lot as a woman spokesperson in this space, and the work that she's doing is really elevating the importance of having those different perspectives. So today we get to kind of unpack that. So Clara Hawkins, first of all, congratulations, félicitations on your award, and welcome to the International Schools podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction and the well wishes. I appreciate it, and I'm thrilled about the award. So lots to celebrate for myself and for everyone who was part of it in my company as well and on my journey.
Dan, I know when you heard about the EU Act and breaking it down, that really kind of piqued your interest. Maybe tell us why. And,
Yeah.
because you work with schools on cybersecurity and compliance. So this could be really interesting.
I mean, the thing is, yeah, you're right. I'm very interested in it because I've heard people talking about it. And the thing is, whenever the EU does anything, it has a massive impact. Not always positive, not always negative, but you just can't ignore it because it's the EU. And even for people outside the EU, most software companies follow whatever the EU says. And obviously the big precedent is GDPR. I mean, GDPR, I remember when I started hearing about that and it was a small thing. And all of a sudden, as you know, John, it's all anybody, if you speak for like more than an hour with any kind of, or half an hour with any kind of IT leadership, GDPR comes up. So clearly this, maybe not that level, but still it's going to be huge. So I think I'm already starting to hear about it, which means other people are starting to hear about it. So I'd love to learn a bit about what it is as a starter. What stage is it at? Just a good overview would be great, and what the impacts might be for schools.
Yeah, so I think I welcome this opportunity because I have been holding my breath a little bit for over 12 months, hoping that schools will start understanding what is actually happening to them, and it seems like it's been quite difficult actually to get the word out that there's something very, very big underway that will profoundly change how we use technology in our schools. And one of the main reasons for that is that under the EU AI Act, most of the AI that we will use in schools will be considered high risk because we are using AI with children. And children are a very special protected category under the EU AI Act. And that means that all of the AI-driven technology we use in schools will have to be used in a completely different way that's compliant with the EU AI Act. And I would say almost none of the technology that's used in school today is in fact compliant. And so this is a major, major issue for EU schools, but it's really also an issue for schools outside of the EU that are using either technology that originates within the EU or tech companies that are designing technology that originates within the EU and deploying it in schools outside of the EU because it is subject to some of the same regulations. So this is a very welcome opportunity for us to dive into the EU AI Act and pick that apart for our schools a little bit.
Yes.
Clara, I just want to tell people in the show notes, there's a white paper that Clara wrote on the EU AI Act and broke it down for K-12 schools. So it's really a great place to go because it kind of breaks it down so you kind of have an idea. And then if you go to her LinkedIn profile, she has a bigger document that she's been very generously sharing out on LinkedIn. And I know a lot of people have been, I actually shared it with our GDPR data protection officer, and they found it super helpful. I think it raised their eyebrows. It was like, how come I don't know about this? So, Clara, maybe how come we don't know about this?
Yeah, it's I'm a little puzzled on this myself as well, and I think that going back to what Dan was saying about GDPR, that in the beginning of GDPR, everybody sort of heard about it and thought, okay, something is coming from the EU, but didn't really understand how wide-reaching that was. I think that EU does have an obligation there to do a greater work with getting that communicated out to our schools. I cannot, having twisted and turned it every which way possible, I cannot imagine a way for public schools, for example, to implement this without significant resources in terms of time and money and government support to get everybody trained and ready. So this is something that our nations need to step up and support with as well. That guiding materials need to be sent out to schools. I think one thing that perhaps could explain it might be that somehow generative AI took everybody by surprise, despite the fact I remember more than 10 years ago working on trends papers going to the European Union for advisory on where we were heading with AI. But I think it's still caught everybody's surprise how wide-reaching this would be. So the EU has only now started establishing the EU offices to work on the code of practices, to work on all of the logistics of putting this law into action, but they have not been remiss in putting it into law, which I think we should all be very grateful for. It will be difficult, but it comes, I believe, with more good than bad. And we will have to find the time to get all of our schools ready, because the price for not getting ready and being non-compliant is significant.
Yep. Great. So what are the, I mean, like at a high level, like what stage are we at? Obviously 2024, I believe you have to be compliant by the end of the year. Is that right?
Well, so we have some time. So it's scaled in over 24 months. And so there are milestones at every 6 months to where we have to be compliant. So by February, the code of practices have to be ready. Schools already this year have to start conducting their AI audits because it takes a long time. And they need to be able to say in 12 months exactly how AI is used in practice in their schools. And that is the tough one. So it's unlike GDPR in the sense that what we are required to do under the EU AI Act is be able to explain in practice how AI is used, and we need to be able to explain how it is not discriminatory, that it doesn't reinforce biases and stereotypes and so on. And you think of something like ChatGPT, that really crosses ChatGPT off the list of AI that we can use in the classroom because it is the most discriminatory, biased AI you can possibly use. If I ask 20 children in the classroom to generate an image of a child in school, that child will be a boy and it will be a white-skinned boy, regardless of what all the children in the international school look like. And that sends out a biased, discriminatory image of reality in the classroom. And so this isn't a tool that under the EU AI Act that we would be able to just simply deploy in a classroom with children because we wouldn't be compliant with the requirements of the Act. So that's just one example of many examples. Other examples can be on the administrative side. Often, for example, HR, human resources, uses AI to help them find their candidates and sort out candidates. They also would have to get through an AI audit on how their algorithm works in practice to ensure that they're not discriminating against certain teachers. So for an international school, for example, it could be that we want to have teachers from all over the world, but maybe the AI sorts out teachers that do not speak English as a first language, for example.
And that's been the case. There have been a lot of issues with that in international schools, even without AI, where there is, and Dan and I have had many guests about this, where maybe you're from the Philippines or South Africa or Zimbabwe, basically a Commonwealth country that has English as part of their languages, but you're not considered native and you're not white. So often the perception is that you are not as good as, say, an Anglophone from Ireland or a more Western-centric country or even Australia, New Zealand.
And I think that's such a good example because it's essentially the same in a sort of broad strokes way, essentially the same that an algorithm will do in an AI because it works off of probability. What is most probably the answer that we're looking for, it doesn't give us the right answer. And so any system that's deployed in a school will have to be able to meet the criteria under the EU AI Act. And it means for schools that starting yesterday, they need to appoint someone to take the lead on doing a complete AI audit in school. I think one way to put it bluntly is that the days of deploying AI in the classroom without accountability are numbered. And there is a lot of technology that teachers no longer will be able to put into the classroom. And when they do put technology into the classroom under the EU AI Act, they are required to actually have been trained in understanding the consequences of that in practice, both in terms of practical implications, but also in terms of privacy, data collection, and so on. And so you can imagine the scale of training, information, and an organization is needed in order for schools to get ready to become compliant for this law.
What's interesting is because Dan and I, with GDPR, I was in another international school. I was kind of leading with the board and some other people, us doing the data mapping. Dan, you remember? I mean,
Yeah, of course.
it was a huge piece of work, and to this day, we're still challenged with teachers putting their taking pictures of kids and putting them on their phones and forgetting that it goes to iCloud or to Google Photos, etc. So I'm wondering, I'm going to give you a scenario, Clara, if I may. Toddle and let's say Afaria manage back. They often will have AI in there, or Snapchat, or Khan Amigo. These are examples of different AIs, and even Google's, I forget, Google Duo. Dan, correct me, I'm wrong. The AI that they're
Gemini now.
Gemini.
By the
If
way,
the-
an interest in Gemini, contact us. We can give you a Gemini transformation package for free.
Okay.
Oh, fantastic.
I
That's
want
a
to
great
know,
app.
so as these companies push that and schools adopt it, because what's happening is, and I'm just thinking in the context that I work in, I see a lot of teachers using AI kind of to do lesson plans, but they just get the Google, they sign in with Google or Apple, Microsoft, not really thinking about it. They leave their screens open. It's kind of the Wild West. Everybody's tasting the nectar and they're thinking, wow, it's so much time saved. But schools also and companies are pushing and saying, hey, we have this AI bot that's going to help you with your rubrics and your lesson plans. Is this over?
Yes, it will. It will be over once
Wow.
schools begin to realize their responsibilities, their legal responsibilities in regards to the EU AA Act. The Wild West will have to come to an end. I think that certainly I have had my share also of startups and different edtech vendors selling me very shiny, amazing things that could do a lot of things in the classroom. But yes, the time for that type of experimentation is coming to an end the way that we have done it in past. Each school really need to have an oversight system so that when new educational technology or any type of technology is brought into the classroom, it really has to go through a process of verification. School leaders will have to become far more competent in asking vendors some of the key questions under the EU AI Act. Tell me about how privacy is built into your design. Tell me how EU AI Act compliance is built into design. Keeping in mind that the EU AI Act is just the first law. We have Italy well underway with its own law. We have the European Council has just created a treaty that are co-signed with countries that are not members of the EU. India is working on a law, and Canada is working on a law. So we are starting to see this on a global scale. And so we need our heads of schools to learn how to ask vendors those key questions in terms of privacy, compliance, data collection. And I think very importantly, the days of using AI without asking parents and guardians and the student for informed consent, those days are coming to an end, because that will not be allowed under the EU AI Act. I'll give you an example. Let's say that I want to use something like this company, Turnitin, that advertises AI detectors. I am not advocating at all for AI detectors. On the contrary, but I know that many teachers have used AI to detect integrity in papers even before generative AI. And what happens then is that the students will turn in their work and the teacher will upload the work to Turnitin, and then they get a report back about the paper. But many teachers don't inform students that they do this, and they also don't ask parents often for permission to do this. It has just been done. as a kind of self-evident thing that teachers ought to be able to do when the school has contracted the technology. But not only do parents, guardians, and students need to give consent, importantly, it has to be informed consent, which means that the school and the EdTech vendor need to work together to ensure that the receiver of the technology, the student and their family, understand exactly what is taking place when they are using the technology, and they must be given an opportunity to opt out of using the technology as well. So yes, the Wild West is coming to an end, where we need to get everybody inside the same fence. So we need the cowboys to herd everybody in there.
Do you
Wow.
not think it's potentially too soon with this EU regulation? I know, because obviously, you know, you could look back a lot of tech things. I'm always a student of tech history, and sometimes governments have tried to regulate things when it was still in a very, very early stage, and things could have, and it maybe has stifled innovation in other ways.
Yeah, it's a good question, but I think the fact is that innovation always races ahead of regulation. I remember seeing recently some video from when Sweden decided to move from driving on the left side to driving on the right side, and people were on the street shouting, "We're not ready, we're not ready." But they figured it out. They closed all traffic down for a day and moved everybody over, and in the end, it worked out. And I think, is it too early? I think no. In fact, in my optics, it's too late. We should have had these type of regulations long ago. And I think a glaring example of how that plays out in a very negative way for our children in schools, for their parents, and also for our educators is what happened during the pandemic, where our tech companies very kindly offered up all of their technology for free because we were all in need. So Google Classroom, Zoom calls, Team calls, Toddle, Cognitive, everybody was free. But what we have since learned is that many of these tech companies didn't actually give it away for free. What they did in return was scrape the data from the users of the technology. So if a teacher sat in a video call with 20 students and things were being written in the chat and links and things were shared, all of that data was scraped up by tech companies to train AI. And we also learned that trackers were put on the children's devices and the teachers' devices, so that even when they logged out of Google Classroom or the video calls, the behavior of the person using the digital device was still being tracked. So we know this affected families because a lot of children use their parents' computers and tablets and so on. And this is also something that hasn't been greatly talked about, but nonetheless, we have the evidence black and white. And I think it's important for us to realize that this has been taking place for a really long time. And if we could go back to 2020 and tell parents and teachers, do you know that if you're using this technology, XYZ happens? I think that 90% of our teachers and parents would say, we don't want to use that because we don't want our children in that environment. And so I think it is high time that we have some regulation to protect our most fragile users, which are our children, but also to protect our schools, our teachers, both in terms of their mental well-being in the digital space, but also their safety in the digital space.
It's so interesting you bring that up because I'm a big fan of Shoshana Zuboff, who wrote Surveillance Capitalism. It's a huge book, 1,000 pages, but she does such a great job of bringing this up. And I think, again, that's another example, somebody that wrote this phenomenal book that really kind of said, guys, wake up. And, you know, COVID came by and we forgot about surveillance capitalism and the behavior surplus and the scraping that's going on. So I just think it's so great for you to break this down and remind us. I mean, you know, we talk about it's too late, but I must say I'm really I don't know if it's happy, but I feel that the EU has done a phenomenal job in being proactive, even though it might be late. And I think, credit has to be given to these governments that don't have the agility of OpenAI and Microsoft and these companies. They have bureaucracy and red tape, and people like yourself that are out there working and making sure that these policies are out there. I think it's so important. And that is the positive of this story, is that we are trying to take some level of control in this Wild West. Because if you think of already, the racism that you brought up with the image generators like Stable Diffusion and DALL-E, there's so many stories of that. And also the idea of how women are perceived, gender inequality and racism. So I think, for schools that are going to think of this as like, oh my God, I can't handle this. Can we really do this? I think we have to turn it around and say, we're trying to take control again. I don't know what you think, Clara.
I think so too. I see it as an incredibly positive thing, and I think someone asked, well, does it mean that we have to shut down all of our AI if we're not ready? And I said, well, if you want to avoid a big fine, yeah, that's what it could potentially mean. So you either need to get ready, or you need to put a little pause on the technology in school until you get it sorted out. But you have no choice but to comply. The fines are set very, very high. They can be as high as 7% of global turnover. So for an international school that's for profit, this is a significant amount of money. For us, I am with Globeducate, and we have schools all over the world. So 7% of our global annual turnover, if we get pop over the fingers based on the EU AI Act and us not being compliant, would be a very significant amount of money. So there is a good reason for us to comply, and of course the self-evident reason. This is something we have to do because the children are not safe today with the AI that we're using in school. But I have to say, with that being said, I understand the panic that some might feel at hearing this, because what are two things that schools don't have? Resources in terms of funding and time. And this will require resources, it will require training, it will require time. And so what can we do? And I think that at Globeducate, we're building the training right now into our design of our training for all teachers, so that we will have everybody ready when each stage of the act comes into place. I would recommend to schools that they start this training, either create their own training by perhaps identifying an AI champion on campus who can take the lead in teaching the school, not just the teachers, but all staff at school about the EU AI Act, because it is all staff from the kitchen to the cleaners. Any person who uses AI on a school campus or in a school organization will have to be compliant with the Act. Another thing that I'm doing is that I'm talking to EdTech vendors, asking them more critical questions. Some have no answers because they have designed their AI in the Wild West and haven't given any thought to child safety, oddly enough. But that's reality of a lot of educational technology. But I'm also talking to ed vendors that have started thinking about this. So one example is a company that has a learning management system, EdQuest, where they have actually built AI compliance into their design of the model. So what happens is that at certain intersections where a decision has to be made by the teacher or the student or anyone using the system, either information will be shown up, like a little warning that pops up and says, at this intersection, you need to take a decision, and these are the things you need to be thinking about. And so this will help schools where even the teachers haven't been trained yet to understand what is the right thing for us to do. And I think that this is a conversation we need to have with far more EdTech vendors. We don't want to, turn off our technology. We want to have a better conversation between school administration, teachers, students, parents, and the vendors on how do we get this technology compliant so that the users are safe. And I think that we will see more and more vendors get into these conversations, and the ones who don't, the ones who fail to divot and prepare, we will see them leave the scene.
So I have a question. How much consequences, how powerful is the EU? Because with GDPR, there have been many cases. I know Orange in France had an issue. There have been different, and even a school in Germany. I know there have been cases where people have been fined, and that was when we were working in a previous experience on the GDPR. We always told teachers, you're personally liable. At the end of the day, the school's there to back you, but if you mess up, you have a personal liability as a citizen, even if you're not a EU citizen, but you're working in EU school, or you have EU citizens in your school and you're in Singapore. So I think that kind of really elevated the importance. Do you think there's teeth behind this? So a lot of teachers are going to say, they will never find me. I'm in some school, or I'll leave somebody else deal with it. How do you kind of address that kind of laissez-faire-ness, not out of disrespect, but because, as you said, there's no time, there's no resources. That's just another thing to deal with.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because as you mentioned earlier on, of course, I also myself know of many cases where I lose my breath a little bit and think, oh, that is not GDPR compliant. Please don't do that in the classroom. And this happens all the time, from taking pictures of students and sending it over WhatsApp to doing some schoolwork with student files over your private account and then transferring into your work account, also not compliant. So these little things happen all the time. But yes, schools have been fined. And really what it comes down to is, did someone file a complaint? Did a parent or a student file or a staff member file a complaint? And 9 times out of 10, the school will be found non-compliant because oftentimes they simply aren't following the regulations of GDPR. And this says something about the complexity of getting these laws into practice. The EU AI Act is different. It's different because the systems, the AI systems that are used in schools are considered high risk. So the AI has a categorization, a sort of no risk AI, limited risk AI, medium, high risk, and then unacceptable risks. So unacceptable risks is something like autonomous weapons or something like that. And high risk rides right under that. And it's put this way because the AI is used in education. Other areas could be something like healthcare, where you also have very vulnerable people that are where the AI is being used. And it requires schools, every single organization that uses AI, to conduct a risk assessment and implement mitigation measures to make sure that it is safe to use the system. So it's not like we have a law, GDPR, everybody gets sort of a rough idea of what that is, and one person on campus is responsible to make sure it happens, and IT and works with data protection. This is not the same. This is really not an IT issue. I would really say this is a different person in campus that should take the lead on this. Think of it as the school's own head of AI that is responsible for oversight and compliance, and will need to ensure that this risk assessment is conducted in the entire ecosystem of the school, from the kitchen to kindergarten, which will take a significant amount of time and effort, and then implement the mitigation measures to make sure that it's safe. This alone is a massive job. Now add to that under the Act, the AI systems are also required to be transparent and explainable to the extent that children need to be able to understand how the system makes decisions, how the data in the system is used, and be able to give their informed consent to using it. So you can see how it's a very different beast than GDPR, and one that really will require significant attention from all of us. And the sooner we get started with that, the better.
So it's interesting that you talk about the high risk, because when a lot of schools were doing GDPR, we had different risks, and a lot of our workflows excuse me, and systems were low risk or medium risk, and we were almost willing to say, okay, low risk, we're not going to get too crazy. I would say the amount of high risk things we had were not as large as, say, medium and low. But what I'm hearing here is the bottom line is the fact that you have children in AI, you're automatically in high risk. So that kind of elevates and amplifies the urgency for schools to really think. And like you said, you are the head of artificial intelligence for Globeducate. So that is a position that was created, if I'm correct, 2023, correct? So it's quite recent. So the school understands what's going on and says, okay, we need to focus. We need to have a point person to really choreograph and curate this whole conversation and this commitment. My question to you is, if I'm a school, say I'm the International School of Dhaka or I'm the International School of Tokyo, do I worry? Am I good to not ignore it for a while?
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember someone asked me about that in 2019 when I said, I think there will be a pandemic coming, a global pandemic, and we should get school ready, because I think this is something that will affect all of the people in school. And this is something that we have seen coming over the last decade. I think it's only just a question of time. And everybody laughed at me. And then a year later came back and said, that was really creepy that you said that. And I would encourage anyone outside of the EU to think of it the same way. Regulation is coming your way. And the sooner you prepare, the better. And the EU AI was actually formed in a way to help other nations align with the EU AI Act. So it's quite easy for them to adopt the EU AI Act. And some nations are already in the process of reviewing that as a possibility. And other international treaties, other international proposals for law are very similar to some respect. Some of the things that are absolutes that are shared by everyone has to do with human dignity. It has to do with privacy and data. It has to do with non-discrimination and upholding human rights. And this is something that will resonate in every law that I have seen so far, and every AI strategy I've seen. And I have read a lot of national AI strategies. So if you're in Dakar and Japan, get ready for regulation. The sooner you get ready, the sooner you will move this into a natural part of the workflow in your organization. The sooner your teachers will be able to manage the change as the shifts are coming. And the more competent the students, teachers, and the families will be in navigating the era of AI, because this is where we're going.
It's so interesting that you bring that up, because over the last 2 years, I've had the privilege of doing quite a few workshops for schools on AI. And it's always interesting when I have an audience of educators, how many of them know about ChatGPT or Stable Diffusion or Gemini or Claude, whatever it might be, even Mistral. But there's not an understanding how this works and what are the ethical implications. And I think it's a bit, there's this great book, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This idea that we're just being entertained to death, the convenience and the frictionless capacity of these very powerful tools just makes it easy. And we get kind of lazy and complacent because it's so convenient. And the convenience almost overrides our capacity to think ethically about what are the values, what are we giving up as we engage with these tools? What does this mean long term, especially with the scraping of data that you mentioned? And that's something is really quite important for people to understand. Do you think this gap that there is that just because schools and nonprofit organizations and even public schools just haven't had the time, or it hasn't been important because everybody's kind of having a good time in the Wild West?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I think about schools and I think about how decisions are made in schools, historically for many schools, it has been a little bit about triage. So if you're a school leader, you come into the beginning of the school year with a great plan of all the things you want to do, but then suddenly you have a kid breaks a leg, another one is filing a complaint, two kids get in a fight, a parent organization wants to have a meeting, and next thing you know, you're triaging your decisions, and it's very hard to focus on a long-term strategy or even look into the future to understand how to steer the school ship in the right direction. And I think that is also something that we often see in the classroom. Teachers over the years have become more and more pressed for time. And so they're making very quick decisions. And in that environment, EdTech vendors has kind of scooped in there to say, we have solutions for you. We can save you time. We have the shiny thing. And if it looks shiny enough, then the school or the teachers will say, oh, I want this. This will solve all of my problems. And as a result, we've gotten in this habit of bringing technology into the classroom without asking the most important question that we could possibly ask before we bring anything into the classroom. Is this safe? And I think that part of the reason why is because technology sounds like something teachers don't know much about. So they just take somebody else's word for it. But teachers already know what they need to do in the classroom. Before they bring something in, they need to find out if it's safe. Even if it's something as complicated as technology, they have a right to ask, they have a right to learn. If it's safe, they have a right to understand how it really works, because they themselves have a right to be protected in this environment. And one of their ethical obligations is to protect children. So we have moved into a system where it was just the Wild West. But I do think that most teachers will soon realize that once they understand how this technology works, they're much more empowered to make the decisions, not only to keep the students safe, but also to really provide excellence in education. They will educate the students better. They're going to have ethics conversations, but they're also going to have conversations about how technology impacts society. From something in the classroom where we're generating photos, or when we're having AI write essays and it's writing that the boys will become CEOs and pilots and doctors, and the girls will become nurses and stay-at-home moms, because this is what's happening with AI. But once teachers begin to understand that that is the case, they will rise up and be empowered in their ability to use this technology in a much more effective way. And when that happens, they will whip around to those EdTech vendors and say, I definitely want some technology, but here is what I need from you. And that will be an entirely different conversation. And I think for all of us will lead to us seeing much more quality educational tech making its way into our schools.
Absolutely, because I think, as educators, we have kind of this ethical responsibility. The people forget when you have a classroom of 24 or 44, whatever the number is, somebody in that classroom is going to become a decision maker long term and is going to impact. And there's kind of the butterfly effect. And I think what you're bringing up is so important, is that how if we understand the ethics and we understand the values and the technical aspects that give us a good perspective of what is of value and what is not of value, suddenly makes us more empowered to have those conversations that you're talking about with these edtech vendors. I wonder, Clara, in the last 2 years, there's been a lot about social media. The Senate has done a whole bunch of things about online harms. There's the book by John Haidt. Do you think this is a reaction that people realize we kind of let the social media companies take over our lives, and now we're saying with AI, hold on, we need to be much quicker, we need much more nimble?
Yeah, so I think I'm glad to see the trends that I'm seeing in social media from the younger generation, because they are abandoning social media more and more. We're seeing it in some of the trends. They still like to go in YouTube streams and have chats, but the social media that we've seen for the last 20 years, like the Facebook type or Instagram type, is becoming less and less interesting for the young people. Many of them have had years of negative experiences in that space, everything from bullying to sextortion to being exposed to explicit materials, or being inappropriately contacted, and they don't want to be part of that anymore. So we are seeing less and less of an interest from the young people, which is a good sign. We're also seeing that parents are beginning to understand that telling your child that they can get a social media account isn't just giving the kid what all the rest of the kids have. It's more like sending them out on the world's largest and most dangerous playground without supervision. And
Yeah.
parents, because they are starting to understand that now, are much more critical and careful and guiding their young people more before they get into social media. Then we also do know that mental health has had some kind of a correlation between the rise of social media and the rise of the numbers of cases we see in terms of mental health with our young people. But there are many other factors, of course, that pushes that, including the pandemic, including sedentary lifestyle, and also the generation that they are. But we will certainly see a shift in terms of how schools will be able to leverage social media, both in terms of marketing, but also in terms of communications, and also how it's used for classes or families to communicate. For example, a lot of schools have Facebook groups or parent groups for a class, or so on, and this will become a thing of the past. So some edtech companies are working on solutions where you go on their platform and have these conversations, which is inside of a safe space. This is where we will see schools heading, because there simply aren't the measurements in terms of data protection and integrity of student data in the social media environment.
It's interesting how there is this change. I even know that I have a Generation Z child, and also the way they're interacting with dating apps is changing, and social media. So you are seeing that shift. Clara, I just would love to hear, there's so much talk about AI, and they always have like you rate it on how dangerous it is or how doomsday. I forget there's a term whenever you listen to a podcast. What is your doomsday number? And I'm just curious, because you're coming to this conversation with so much positivity. And what's really enriching is to hear that there are organizations and government policy saying we're going to take control. We're doing this because we want to protect these high risk stakeholders, children in the case of schools. what is your feeling? Are we, even though AI came very quickly and it's moving very quickly, we're already at different versions of ChatGPT coming out, and there are new ones. And every time you turn around, there's a new model and more powerful. The context windows get bigger, and well, we even hear that there's no more data. You read about the data wall where AI can't scrape anything, so it's starting to make synthetic information itself. All these things feel very doomsday. Where do you stand as, first of all, a leader and also somebody that's working in the space and representing the voice of women? Just be curious on your reflection on where we are, kind of big
Yes.
picture.
It's a big question, but I have myself gone through the existential crisis of artificial general intelligence. So that is when AI becomes significantly more intelligent than us. But I went through this crisis about 20 years ago when I first learned with this and engaged my brain in the possibilities. We are quite some ways away from that, and certainly very far away from our AI becoming autonomous. It is not human. It is a machine, and it has a lot of errors. And as you say, it's built on data, and data that is then trained on by algorithms that are designed primarily by, statistically speaking, by young white males. So there are biases and limitations in the systems that we have. But there is AI being built that is very promising in terms of being able to do just absolutely incredible things. And we will see a rapid continuation in development of AI. Some have said this is the worst AI will ever be. But what they mean with that is to say that in 5 years alone, we will look back at 2023 and compare it to something like the first ever developed automobile in terms of technology, comparing to what we have today. And I think that what we will see much more of, and I think this is the bigger issue, is integration of AI into our everyday life. In just another year, I think, as I've been waiting for prototype to finish and the first model to come out. But in another year, when we talk again, a year from now, let's do that.
Yeah,
I will have AI-driven glasses on, and I will be able to have notes running in the periphery of my vision while I am having a conversation with you, or I can watch a Netflix show or look up a cooking recipe. Simply from the glasses that are on my eyes. We will see students come into schools with AI-driven glasses. In the next 5 years, it will be a relatively common thing. We will see that students will have their own teacher/tutor built into their AI that follows them everywhere they go and knows absolutely everything about them and forgets nothing. That person, they will think of it as a person. We think of it as a machine, but that person for them, their digital tutor, will become a lifelong presence in their life. It will follow them from kindergarten all the way through their entire life and guide them and advise them and help them with everything from decorating their first home to picking out a spouse, to helping them find the right spouse, to picking their education. These very significant integrations of AI into our everyday life, that is what will start to shift society, because we will see one group of people, some people refer to it as the AI class, will shift towards using that technology as an everyday thing, along with the benefits and deficits, but many benefits in terms of advances in work life and income and so on. But we will see an increasingly larger group of people who will not be participating in those developments. We call this the digital divide. So
Yes.
the the divide between those who have access to these advanced technologies and those who won't. And one of the reasons why the group of those who won't will continue to rise is because people will also start losing their job due to the fact that they don't know AI. And the jobs that will go first are primarily those jobs that are held by women and minority communities. So these are fields where normally you wouldn't need a high school degree to do the job. Those are the type of jobs that will be replaced, pushing that divide, and that will lead to some social consequences for us. Fewer people in work, more people without a meaningful income, more people who will need to be significantly upskilled in order to contribute to society, and who will pay for that, and so on. And then a more or higher level of unemployment amongst women and minorities. And we know from our past history that high unemployment between women, among women and minorities, usually do not lead to very good social consequences.
Absolutely
Those
not.
are the things that I worry about. But the reason why I still feel positive is because we're pushing regulation and we're starting to see movement, but also because these are exactly the issues that teachers are absolute experts in tackling in the classroom. They know how to have these conversations. They know how to teach the students how to think critically about it. They know how to teach students how to be creative in their problem solving. They know how to facilitate debate opportunities, discussion opportunities, civil action, and global citizenship. So I believe that our schools will take on a role in some of this, simply because it falls very naturally into a school curriculum. So I feel quite hopeful, actually. I am not in a state of panic. So not yet anyway, but I'll let you know.
Yeah, but Clara, I think this is something that often when I do workshops with different schools on AI, I always tell teachers it's not a race, first of all. It's not about catching up. And secondly, don't forget, you have the wisdom of critical thinking. You understand kids. You know the nuance of their ethics, their values. You understand the minds of children. That is the best equipment that you can bring to the conversation. If you know how to use ChatGPT really well, yeah, great or not, but at the end of the day, it's about your ethics, your values, and how do you transfer that into the classroom for a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 16-year-old. And I really appreciate you highlighting that's what teachers bring to the conversation, and that should be the focus, because that's the priority. So I just so thank you for sharing that. Clara, we can't thank you enough for being part of this conversation. It's been fantastic. And you said in a year's time, so I will be emailing you and harassing you like I did this time with a lot of reminders, because I know how super busy you are. But we would love to connect again and see where we are. And I just want to again congratulate you on the TechWomen100 Global Achievement Award for 2024. Wonderful. Hats off to you, because I know you've done so much work in so many different spaces, and your humbleness and capacity to break things down in a way that everybody can understand. And I think your white paper on the EU Act and interpreting it for K through 12 schools is a must read for any school leader, any educator. It's in our show notes. And Clara has also got links to Globeducate, the organization that she's with. And you can also find out more about the TechWomen100 Global Awards and the work that they're doing in that space. Clara, thank you very much. I want to remind our audience that the show notes is on the site. Also, if you feel so inclined, do give us a rating. We've never actually said anything in the last few years. And then Dan and I were like, oh, we should ask people to rate us. So if you want to put a few stars out there on your favorite podcast, we'd love that. And thank you for all the comments and the feedback on LinkedIn. We really appreciate your engagement. And Clara, thank you very much again for your time. And hopefully you can celebrate now and enjoy that moment that you so well deserve. Thank you very much for being on the International Schools Podcast.
Thank you ever so much, John, and thank you also to Dan, and a warm thank you to the audience who listened with us today. It's so much appreciated, and I look forward to continued conversation about AI and education as we go forward.